Welcome to another episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying the gig. I'm your host, Tanner Guss, and I'm joined by Alicia Wrigley, a bassist and vocalist from my home, Salt Lake City, Utah. Alicia is a great person, a great player. She works hard, and she knows a thing or two about a thing or two. We talk about cultivating joy, morning routines, having agency in your learning, grad school, and how it can be embarrassing and frustrating to not know things as an older student. We talk about sexism and accessing your higher self. Oh man, so much good stuff, and I don't want to waste any more time, so we're going to hop in. Thanks for joining us, and please welcome Alicia Wrigley.
Hello.
Hi, Alicia Wrigley. Welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Awesome. Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on here, and I'm sure we'll talk about some great stuff. I wanted to ask you right off the bat, I saw on Instagram lately you had posted how you're trying to cultivate more joy in your life these days, and that just seemed like a beautiful phrase, and I was hoping you could elaborate on that and let us know what exactly that means and what it looks like for you.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is kind of a new thing for me that I'm trying to work on. I am in the summer before my second year of grad school right now. And last year was kind of rough. I just got super overwhelmed and was working super hard. And then this summer, I just realized that my husband and I, he's also a musician, we were just working crazy hard, gigging, and we run a music camp for kids. And I realized that I wasn't really doing anything fun ever and that I was kind of sad. So I decided I was going to try some things to change that a little bit. So the specific post that you're mentioning is a picture of me on a trapeze, and I am currently taking a trapeze class. We just took a trip to LA, and they have this flying trapeze school on the Santa Monica Pier, which I highly suggest to anybody in LA. It's so scary and so fun, but I just kind of fell in love with it. And then when I got back to Salt Lake, I decided I would take a trapeze class because it's something that really scares me, and it's something that's good for my bass playing muscles, and it also feels totally different than music, and it's a really good outlet. So that's kind of the first step in my cultivation of joy right now.
Oh, that's so cool. And it's awesome to hear that you followed through with it when you got back. And there is something special about trying new things that scare you. And especially as musicians, doing things actively in our lives that aren't just music.
Yeah. Yeah, music will take over your whole life if you let it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but balance is for sure something that I personally am trying to work on right now. And I guess my other part of seeking joy would just be trying to find time to spend with people. Being a musician is hard because you're busy at the times when everybody else is free. And so sometimes you really have to work to see people, especially people who aren't musicians, which not everybody in my life is a musician. Most of them are, but not everybody.
Right. When you're out gigging, everyone else is off work, and now they're trying to relax. And then when people who have day jobs are at work, you're at home recovering from the gig or practicing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it makes it hard to see friends from high school or friends from church or friends who don't understand the lifestyle that I have.
Mm-hmm. Have you found any hacks for that problem yet that have worked for you, or is it just a matter of persistence?
I think a lot of it is persistence, but sometimes I specifically say, okay, tonight is set aside to be with friends, and I won't accept a gig if it comes in, which is, every time you say no to a gig for a reason that's not I'm sick, I'm dying, I am booked somewhere else, it feels wrong. But sometimes it's really needed. So sometimes I'll set aside personal nights, and then other times I just try and be really open about my schedule and just let people know I'm thinking about them and I want to be with them, and just having the, forethought to plan things in advance. Like I usually have to plan something 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And then I just try to really honor those commitments so that I can still see people. It's a little bit more complicated, but it works out. I'm not working every single night. So the one night a week I'm not working, let's spend that with friends.
Yeah. I love it. And it can be hard to, well, I guess you have a night off and you might be tempted to just spend that with yourself. And maybe that's what you need. But I do think having these non-musical interactions is really important, and it is often really beneficial to use that free time for those people.
Well, and I think it's important for me too. Like I am aware that I am very extroverted, and like being with people energizes me. Especially like I'm a weird extrovert. I don't like want all the people all the time. I want 2 or 3, maybe up to 5 people talking about something deep. That's the kind of extrovert I am. So for me, that's energizing. But like my husband is introverted, and sometimes he just needs a night at home with me and doesn't want to be with friends. So I think too, like just because I want to be with friends on my nights off doesn't mean that every musician necessarily will. And just being self-aware and really planning what's going to be the best for you is the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel you with, I think I might be that kind of extrovert too. I think a group of up to like 10 people where you can still be having like a singular conversation, you know?
Yes.
But
yes,
once
it's a very strange form of extroversion, but
yeah,
it's what I am.
yeah, I think I can still feel like maybe an entertainer in those size groups where you can you can make jokes and talk to everyone, but once it gets much bigger, like a party, then I am overwhelmed.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. Yeah, and if we're just talking about like surface level stuff, I kind of check out. But if we're talking about things that I think are real, like I get super excited. We have a book club in my neighborhood through my church, and it's like my favorite thing because it's like 6 women talking about like, we read everything. Sometimes we talk about like feminism, and sometimes we like read crappy fiction novels. It's maybe my favorite thing that I do is that book club.
Awesome. Do you have other non-musical activities that you're participating in that you think help you keep a balanced existence?
Yeah, like right now I have been making a much more conscious effort to exercise, which I think, that's kind of what I do for myself. I just find if I'm doing it regularly, everything else works out a little bit better. And also, like, I play the double bass, and I'm 5'3", and honestly, like, physically, I'm at kind of a disadvantage with my instrument.
Right.
And so it's really important for me to stay strong. And I always notice when I haven't been exercising, I start feeling a lot more pain. So like it's really necessary for my music, but also benefits my non-life music. And then I also just got really brave and had an intake appointment at a counseling center, and I'm seeking some counseling, which I think is going to be very helpful. And I'm excited that I actually took action on something I've been thinking about for like a year.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Good for you. Are you seeing this person because of music-related stresses or just general anxiety?
Yeah. I think I'm a really anxious and perfectionistic person to begin with. So I think that no matter what field I was in, I would probably feel some of the things that are leading me to seek out help, which is basically I have a lot of anxiety symptoms that I manage pretty well sometimes and then not so well other times. So I think music, because it's a field that's really, everybody works super hard. It can be very competitive. The hours don't have really good boundaries like a traditional job would, where, you go home and you aren't working anymore. With jazz and with music in general, you just feel like, oh, well, I'm not doing anything right now. I should be practicing. So I feel like no matter what I was in, I would have problems, but music is just maybe a perfect storm for people who are like me to maybe indulge in some of our less healthy tendencies.
And what are some of those tendencies for you, at least? Or are they just the ones that you just said?
Yeah, for me, perfectionism. I tend to expect just a really lot of myself and then set goals that are way too high, or even just comparison to other people, not honoring my own path and where I'm at. So, yeah, those are some of the things.
Mm-hmm. Why did you said it was kind of like a year-long process of wanting to make this decision before you went through with it? Or did you not say that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I said.
Okay.
I considered it for a really long time without actually taking action. And now that I've done it, I kind of wish I had done it sooner. But what led me to that are a few things. First of all, the symptoms just got worse this year. Like when I'm managing it really well, I'm totally fine. And sometimes I get a little stressed, but I can, do yoga or exercise and I'll get better. But when it's really, really bad, I have panic attacks. And I had like a couple of those in the last semester, and like one prevented me from going to class one day. And I was like, okay, we probably better get this reined in a little bit. But I have a couple of really good friends. One of them was the director of my program last year, Chris Johnson, and he's just a really wise and kind human, and was really open with me about his own experience with therapy, and really suggested that I seek it out in like a totally non-judgmental way. And my friend Mel Shore also just encouraged me and told me about how much it helped her. But what really helps me is someone really close to me in my family, who I won't reveal because I don't think she's sharing yet with people that she's seeing a therapist, but she just came to me and was like, hey, Alicia, I just wanted you to know that I started seeing a therapist, and it was super helpful, and I just think it might help you too. And just somebody who knows me really well, it kind of meant a lot. And I was like, okay, maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. So I finally did. But someone at book club actually said something really interesting the last time we met, and they were talking about something totally different, but they were talking about seeking help. And she said something along the lines of, like, if something feels off for a short while, it's okay. But if it feels off for a long while, just seek some help. And I just think that's a good rule of thumb, like for anything. If anything feels weird for more than a few weeks, like maybe it's time to just look outside of yourself. And maybe that's a therapist, or maybe that's making some habit changes, or maybe that's finding a new private teacher in a music context. I don't know. She said that and it really stuck with me. So I finally kind of moved into a more active role instead of just thinking about it.
Right. That's so great to hear. And I'm curious, were there specific reasons that you were reluctant to go in the first place? Were you stubborn and just felt like you could handle it on your own? Or was there a financial barrier, or did you just not really understand the value of seeing a professional?
A little bit all of the above. So I'm in a kind of strange position where both of my parents are trained therapists.
Oh, okay.
My dad worked in a more of an administrative sense for his entire career, but my mom is a licensed clinical social worker, and she works, like doing one-on-one therapy. So for some reason, instead of making me more likely to seek out therapy, I kind of just assumed I already knew some of the skills from, growing up in that environment where we talk about our feelings really openly. And I don't know, I just kind of assumed I didn't need it. And then also I was worried it was going to be super expensive. And, I'm in the middle of grad school right now, and I'm married to another musician, and we're fairly early in our career and still working on building up savings and things. So I was worried it was going to be super expensive, but I just looked into the counseling center at my university, and it's ridiculously affordable. So much less than I thought. And I was like, goodness, this isn't even an issue. I should have looked into this way sooner. And then also because I'm so perfectionistic, I was like, oh, I'll just educate myself and fix this problem myself. And I love self-help books and podcasts and things, and I've been listening to things for a long time, but not really applying them. And now I'm realizing. And so I just kind of thought I could sort it out myself. But I think having another set of ears is going to really help me, and also assignments to actually make changes instead of just listening to positive things.
Right. You have an impartial third party to hold you accountable.
Yes, exactly.
Well, best of luck. I'm so glad to hear that you're going to see someone like that.
Me too. I'm proud of myself. It's silly, but I'm very proud of myself for doing it.
Well, yeah, I think you should totally give yourself props whenever possible. And so do you think part of this increase in your anxiety that you were feeling was a result of being back in school and going to grad school?
Yeah, it's just a really high pressure environment, and I don't think it was the only reason, but definitely was a factor.
And have you felt like grad school has been more or less intense than your undergrad?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think as far as intensity, it's maybe a little bit more intense, but honestly, I just feel like I'm in a lot different spot than I was as an undergrad. I took off 4 years between doing my undergrad and my graduate degree. And so, when I graduated from my undergrad, I think I was 22, 23. I took 5 years because I got two degrees. And then I went back when I was 27. And so I'll finish before I'm 30, but just in the latter half of my 20s, I feel like I'm feeling a lot more pressure. Like when you're super young, you're like, oh, I don't know this, but I'm super young, so it's okay. Now if there's stuff that I don't know, I like naturally go to a shame point, and I'm like, oh, I'm 26, 27. I should know this. I should be good at this already, which like it just really isn't fair to myself. Like, maybe I could have done better at learning, but maybe I didn't have the opportunity, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't the time yet. So I think that's a lot of what I'm fighting against in grad school, is feeling like I wish I knew more than I know now.
Yeah, I think I understand that. Must be frustrating, and also it can be hard to forgive yourself, and additionally hard because you can't change it. You just have to accept it like it is. There's nothing you can do it now except learn it. I guess better late than never. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So now that you're back in school after having been out of it, and I'm assuming during those 4 years you were doing a lot of learning and growth still, but more on the gig, learning from professionals. And after having these experiences, do you think that it's still effective to teach music in a classroom in a institutionalized setting?
So my answer on this is yes and no. The yes part is this. I think that it can absolutely be taught in the classroom. And for a lot of people, it's a really good way to get exposed to big amounts of information in a short time. But I think that one of the things that music schools struggle with is communicating to students that a lot of what's being a musician cannot be taught in an institutionalized setting. And, why would they say that? Like, it undermines them a little bit. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But what I mean about the things that can't be taught, first of all, you need experience. Like, you have to work and you have to learn from being on the bandstand. And then more than that, too, I honestly believe that no one can teach you anything. And what I mean by that is, you can't learn something that you're not ready to receive. And so I really wish that in my undergrad, I had realized this a little bit more, and harnessed a little bit more what I wanted to learn. I think the danger of music school is that people will lose their agency in learning. They kind of set up this 4-year program, and it's really easy to think like, okay, if I do this and I get good grades in all of my classes, then I'll be ready. And the hard thing too is it sets you up for this not super healthy relationship where you're going to the school and like expecting to be taught, and then you go back and you do it, and then you go back and you ask for more to be taught. But the truth of the matter is, we talked a little bit about how everyone's always a student. If your experience of being a student is always reliant on somebody else's direction, then you're going to be pretty unsuccessful when you go out into the world and need to learn for yourself. And I think that's one of the things I learned pretty quick in those 4 years between my undergrad and my grad, is that I was really good at getting good grades. I did 5 years of music school, 5 years of school. I earned 2 undergraduate degrees. And honestly, I don't know if I learned all that much because I wasn't actively asking myself, okay, what do I want to learn? What do I need to learn? And then figuring out how to make what was being offered fit into that model. Instead, I was building my entire model of what I need to learn off whatever they're teaching me is probably the right thing, which it may be, and it also may not be. But I think the people that are the most successful in music school are those who gather what's being offered, but never lose sight of what they want, and use everything that they're learning to support what's already a desire inside them, instead of just following the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to unpack it maybe a little bit, the information that's being spoon-fed or force-fed in some situations by the class is helpful if it's what you're wanting to learn and you're eager to accept it. But if it's not what you're learning, if it's not what you're wanting to know, it's not going to help you that much. And maybe the better approach is to utilize the resources that you have, which is the profession, like the professors and the professionals that are teaching at the school, to get insight on the things that you do want to know about, because that's what in your mind, what you're ready and eager to accept. And so using those resources to achieve that is a skill that you can train yourself to use more and more.
Right. Yeah, I think that, but I also think that like when you're 18, 19, in your first few years of music school, like you don't know what you don't know. There certainly is a place where it's helpful to sit in a class and have somebody who knows more than you say, like, this is what you need to know, and this is what you need to know, and this is what you need to know. But simultaneously, I think that we can do, as a community, a lot better job at teaching people to also, while they're accepting, what makes other people great, to learn more about their own curiosity and let their love for whatever it is drive what they're doing. So, I really think that the idea of having like a basic curriculum that everybody is on the same page, everybody kind of speaks the same language, that's good. I think it's helpful, especially for younger students. But the problem gets, especially when we get a little bit older, where, we haven't explored things because we love them. We've explored things because we've been told to explore them. And I just think that finding a balance in school between following your heart and also following the program is really important. And I feel like for me, I did a great job following the program, but I didn't do a great job following my heart. So I'm kind of learning how to do that now. And I think that you'll just get a lot more out of it if you come with a lot of curiosity. And, the way that we educate in the United States, we don't really encourage curiosity. We encourage memorization and, synthesis of information and spitting it back out, but not self-directed learning. And I think in music, you need some of both.
Yeah, for sure. I think any good university should set you up. It should teach you how to be your own teacher. And I also think that, especially in music school, you have so many classes to take and you have to do your gen eds like everyone else. But the big time difference in that degree path is that you have, every time that you're not in a classroom, it's almost just assumed that you're going to be, if you're not like eating or sleeping, you're practicing,
Right.
And I think one problem that I've seen is there are people who are so single-minded and focused on getting an A in a class that they are complaining about. They'll complain about a class that they're like, this isn't what I want to do at all. I don't care about the information. But at the same time, they're spending an absurd amount of time trying to get an amazing grade in that class. And I took a different route in that I set out to get a C in those classes because I wasn't comfortable putting in that much time in something that I didn't want to learn about. And I feel like I, as a result of that, was way less stressed about these classes, and I had more time to focus on the things that I did want to learn about. And I gave that advice out to like underclassmen, who would ask about these hard classes, and I would say, if you aren't interested in it, put your time where you are, because you are paying a lot of money to be at school, and you should try to have as much agency in it as you can, as you said.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was for sure one of those first people who spent an obscene amount of time earning perfect grades in, things that had very little to do with what I've ended up doing in my life. It's hard because there's a part of me too that also thinks that like learning for the sake of learning is good, but I just think that acknowledgement of time, that you only have so much time and that where you're going to spend it is going to influence where you go. So, I have to take a class this coming semester on cyclicism in 19th century orchestral music. Why in the world that's required for me to get a master's degree in jazz studies, I do not know, but I have to take it. And I'm really trying to go in with the thing, maybe I can glean something from this that's related to what I want to go, but really, like, I just need to get a good enough grade to keep my scholarship or my TA-ship and glean what I can from it. But, an A is not maybe the goal that I need to have for that class.
I'm glad you're at that point, because it is impossible to, I think, pursue your passion fully if you're also invested in being perfect at things that you aren't passionate about.
For sure. And I think too, an important lesson that I learned, again, this is Chris Johnson, my mentor and teacher, just about time, even when you are fully invested in something, we were taking a composition class, and I'm fully invested in composition. I want to get good at that. But he made a really good observation that, in collegiate classes, we have to stick to semesters and weeks and a syllabus. And honestly, is that the right pace for your learning? Maybe, maybe not. So he used to always say, what you're learning today maybe isn't for today, and just take good notes and come back to it. And so I think just an awareness of time in general, and just thinking okay, I cannot realistically do this to the best of my ability. I just have to, I can't master this in a semester, or I can't master this before the quiz, before the playing test. So I need to work on it, try and make some progress, and then take good notes so I can actually come back and make it a part of myself through practice later. I think that's one of the big challenges of collegiate sorts of education, because we can't be self-directed in our time, and maybe just learning to come to peace with that and strategize for it ahead of time.
Absolutely. Well, are there aspects of school that you're really enjoying that are making it worthwhile and that you're very excited about participating in? I love, one of the reasons I decided to go back to school was because I missed the community of people that are super focused on learning. And I mean, there's community for sure outside of the school setting. I would assume in any community. I only have lived in Salt Lake, so I can only speak to this place, but just being around that intensity was something I was really excited for. And, I love that in school you just have kind of built-in mentorship, both from teachers and from other students. I just think that's a really helpful thing, and
everybody is there with the assumption that you're not done yet. Like, everyone's there to learn. And so I think that takes off some of the pressure that you might experience in like a more professional environment where, you know, we have this idea that people should be done. And I don't think that's true. I think everybody is always a student. And if you're not, then you're like not getting the most out of your life. But at school, there's just that automatic permission to be a student. And I kind of love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I don't know any of my personal like musical heroes who I haven't heard make the statement that they either know nothing or they know very little and that they're lifelong students. It seems like the people, in my opinion, who know the most are the least likely to pretend that they like know everything.
Yeah, I actually like saw a Instagram post yesterday from Nicholas Payton, and it was somebody who had like written in a question that he'd screenshotted his answer to, but the question was like, how do you find a good teacher? And he was like, well, first of all, there are no teachers. There are only students who share things with other students. And I was like, oh man, that gets me right in the feels. I love that. We're all
awesome.
Just students sharing things with other students.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. Okay, so I was thinking we could hop back to what we were talking about before I realized what I wanted to say. And
sure.
So this feeling of frustration of not knowing what you think you should know at this point in your career, does that tie into maybe a greater problem of comparing yourself to whatever imaginary version of yourself that you think you should be, or comparing yourself to real life versions of other musicians and thinking that you need to have all the same strengths and abilities as them?
For sure. I think that there's definitely points at which having like an idealized version of yourself are not helpful, but honestly, I'm actually pretty comfortable with that idea of having like an idea of what you should be and where you should be going, because that gives you a goal. But I definitely struggle with comparing myself to other musicians. I always have. And it's something that I'm really trying to work on right now. And you're right, being in school, like, you know, especially in grad school, I was in classes with like 2 or 3 people. And like, when you're actively trying to do something at the same time that somebody else is doing something and they're doing it better than you, like, that can be a really difficult situation to be in, and still stay healthy in your brain and be kind to yourself. And also social media makes it really, really difficult not to compare yourself to other people, because you can do it anytime, anywhere, if you're not being conscious about it. So yeah, I definitely think that plays a role into me not being comfortable with where I am, which, you know, sometimes discomfort is productive and it pushes us to be better. And then sometimes it just causes fear that makes movement impossible. And I think mine is more of the latter, instead of really wanting to be better, just wanting to measure up against other people. And you're right, everybody's different. So it's kind of a useless goal.
It is, but it's also so hard to avoid, which is almost doubly frustrating.
For sure.
When you talk about being comfortable having a version of yourself that you are comparing yourself to, how does that work for you in your practice and your goal setting to achieve that? And how do you approach it in a way where you aren't maybe constantly disappointed in yourself for not being that ideal version?
Well, like, one of my biggest goals in general is to become the best version of myself. Like, when I'm being my noblest, that is what I'm trying to do. And I think that sometimes I think of myself as 2 different people at the same time. There's me right now, and then there's like the noblest version of me. And I really believe that person lives inside of me and that I can learn from her. And I know that sounds like kind of woo-woo, and it is. It's like totally based on some of the self-help stuff that I've looked into. But asking myself, like, what would the best version of myself do? Or what would the best version of myself tell myself right now? I don't know. It's very empowering to think like I know more than maybe I think I do. And I can learn from the wisdom that I already have. It's weird to talk about, but I use that model sometimes when I'm trying to decide how to move forward.
Well, I like it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you aren't comparing yourself to a fictional version of yourself, like this superhero alter ego that's always virtuous and perfect. You're comparing yourself to the highest form of yourself that is already present and existent in you. You're just maybe giving yourself permission to be that version of yourself.
Yeah, and to access the wisdom that, I think every person, just by virtue of being a human, which is a huge privilege, has a lot of wisdom, and sometimes we just have a hard time accessing it. So that kind of inner dialogue between my right now self and my best self can be a really helpful way for me to access some of the best advice from me. Because I'm the only person that knows what it's like to live in my body and to have my mind and my feelings and thoughts. And so, who better to advise me than me?
I love it. Yeah. Are there specific dialogues and maybe situations where you feel like you're in conflict with your higher self? And what are those? Like, do you find yourself in similar narratives a lot where you're having to remind yourself of what a higher version of you should be doing?
Yeah. So I right now, as part of this goal of mine to cultivate joy as I go into my second year of school, I've been doing a lot of research into the ideas of a woman named Brooke Castillo, who runs a program called the Life Coach School. And she basically has a model that helps you identify what you're thinking, because she claims that every feeling that you have is because of a thought that you have, and your feelings are what lead to your actions and then your results. So if you want to control your results and your actions and your feelings, you have to control your thoughts first. So I've been actually implementing a bit of a daily practice where I go through some of the resources that she offers and kind of redirect my thoughts. And that's usually a time when I reflect and think like, okay, what would my best self think about this? And redirect some of that thinking actively, like on paper. And it's part of my like morning ritual that gets me going for the day, which if I do that, I do a lot better job at not comparing myself to other people.
Awesome. Do you have a consistent morning routine that you do?
For sure. And I find that if I let my morning routine slip, like I really, really struggle. So when I'm living my routine the best way, which is not always, there are definitely times when this goes out the window, but I always try to get back to it. I do best if I wake up early in the morning. I'm a morning person, which is unfortunate being a jazz musician, but I am. So I try and get to bed as soon as I can after gigs, and then get up as early as is reasonable with still getting the amount of sleep I need. So on weekdays, I really like to be up by 6:30, and I have a big glass of water because I don't drink enough. So I try to drink an entire 32-ounce mason jar full of water like a true millennial. I start the day with religious practice. I'm a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so I start every day with religious study and contemplation and prayer. And then I move on to my personal study, which is kind of what I described of thought work. And I'm assuming that when I start working with the therapist, that's when that will be slotted in. Then I do a planning session for the day, and then I try to move right into a musical warm-up if I have the flexibility in the mornings, which I try to protect pretty much. But my biggest rule is that I try not to look at social media or email before 2 p.m., and I can only do it if I have gone through all of those steps, because all of those things are really important to me. And if I do that, it like sets me up for a really productive day. I know where my priorities are, and usually I end up spending way less time on social media, and I just have been productive all morning, and that feels good. So if I'm truly tired, I can take a nap or, watch TV or read a book. And then if I have extra energy left over, then maybe I can engage with social media, but in a much more happy way, because it's much harder to feel bad about yourself after you've already been productive that day.
That's all incredible. And I especially love that you don't plan your day until after you've done your core values of religious study and personal reflection, and then you plan your day. Whereas I feel like if you were to have a plan already in place, you would be overwhelmed by the pressure to fulfill those tasks while trying to do these other parts of your routine.
Right. Well, I mean, it just gets so easy to spend your whole day putting out fires and meeting other people's expectations. So I really find that if I get in touch with my own spirituality and my own goals for myself, those can really be foremost in my mind as I go through the day. And it's also just, those things are really empowering. So it's a lot easier to power through some of those tasks that I might want to procrastinate, like writing contracts or putting together set lists, some of the less glamorous parts of my job, rescheduling students, which is maybe the bane of my entire existence. Those things are easier to get through if I've started my day by filling up my cup.
Right. Fantastic. Maybe we could transition into talking about some of the discrimination aspects that you faced, because I feel like we've covered the health stuff pretty well. So being a jazz instrumentalist, well, you're also a singer, but I think a lot of your work is an instrumentalist, and there's not nearly enough female representation in the jazz world, particularly as instrumentalists, both now and throughout history and in universities. Have you faced particular mental walls and discrimination and sexism during your career so far in your schooling?
Yeah. I mean, this is something I've thought about a lot and talked about with a lot of other female musicians that I come into contact with. And I think the biggest thing that is hard is I never know how much it's actually affecting me, and that can drive you crazy. So, I mean, it's pretty rare that someone who is a fellow musician will be outright sexist to me. It almost never happens. And I really find that the better musician someone is, the less they care that I'm a woman and the less it's an issue. Usually those things, I get lots of stupid comments from guys in bars, or well-meaning people who, will tell the male musicians on a gig how well they played and tell me how beautiful I look, which is kind, but, it discounts what I've just done. Yeah, but the hardest thing is I just don't know how much it affects me. And so it's always something that I wonder if if I was a dude, would I have been called for that gig? Or, is something that I'm doing being perceived a certain way because I'm female? A lot of times I get lots of comments on how I move when I play, and I'm a very physical player. I do move a lot, but people make a weird sexual thing of it sometimes, and I'm just kind of flabbergasted that someone would want to sexualize my playing, and I don't think that would happen if I was a man. It would just be interpreted as playing an instrument, doing a very physical job, playing a giant instrument. So I don't know. It can be something that is just kind of in the back of your mind all the time. And I think, that's really what privilege is, to just not have to think about those things. And so, that's something that I unfortunately don't have the privilege not to think about. I always wonder, is this something that's affecting me? And a lot of times the answer is, I don't know. And I can't know.
Yeah, that's difficult. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm also curious. I know some of my female, some of the female musicians I went to school with would often get frustrated receiving certain opportunities because they felt like they only got asked to do it because the group or organization wanted to have female representation, and they felt like it wasn't entirely based on merit. Have you had experiences similar to that?
Yeah, I definitely have. Like early in my career when I started leading stuff, I got asked a lot because I'm really good friends with another female musician, a pianist, and really I can think of maybe like one or two other active musicians, but there's very, very few active female instrumentalists in particular in Salt Lake City. I think it's her and me, and that's really all I can think of. There are there's maybe a couple more, but there's just not very many of us. The rest are singers, and they're obviously musicians too, but they face sometimes different expectations than instrumentalists. In any case, we started getting a lot of requests to put together events around the women in jazz theme. And it's still something that I really grapple with. And I think I've actually read a lot of other, international and national acts kind of talking about this focus that we like to do of women in jazz. But the fact is, like, it's tokenizing, and it's giving women opportunity, but it's giving them a limited opportunity as, like, you are a musician and you're a woman, and we're going to focus on both of those things instead of just like let you, not maybe have an agenda about feminism or even having to talk about the fact that you're a woman. Just something about promoters wanting to say, like, oh, look at these gals, they can play music just as good as the boys can. It just feels really kind of icky.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've made an effort to step away from. And to their credit, the people that were asking me to do that I've had a conversation with this about have been super supportive and really have been like, we just wanted to give you opportunities. And, it really was coming from a place of goodness. So I don't discredit that, but I just think it's hard because any sort of action that we take to equal out the inaction, it feels kind of forced. And that's not to say it shouldn't be done, but yeah, it's always there in the back of your mind. Like, did I get this opportunity just because I'm a woman or because I'm good at what I do? I think it's probably both, which maybe isn't a bad thing, but I definitely have felt that kind of like ickiness. I definitely too have been hired by less noble people who really just did want like a female because it's interesting. And yeah, I've had some pretty gross interactions around that early in my career. I think I've gotten a lot better at dealing with it, but earlier in my career, I was working with this one guy who like wouldn't let me wear pants on gigs. And I was 18. So I was like, okay, sure, I want a gig. But then I grew up a little bit and realized like, that's gross. Like I play the bass. I like pants are kind of like a job requirement. It's really hard for me to play in a dress because I play with my knees up. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it was just gross. It made me feel gross.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm sorry. I agree that, obviously there's people who are abusing the role of female musicians, but I agree that there are a lot of people who are well-intentioned in trying to put together these opportunities for female jazz musicians to try to counter this or balance the scale. And in your mind, what's the best way to go about balancing the gender gap in jazz music without tokenizing female instrumentalists?
I mean, it's so hard. It's so hard. One of the things that I think is really helpful that I learned early on as I was writing a paper for one of my classes this year is actually learning more about tokenization of women in general. I think is really, really helpful just because a lot of times we don't know what something is until we understand it a little bit better. So there's a paper that was written in the 1970s that several female jazz scholars have kind of riffed off. But the idea was there are multiple kinds of tokenization in the roles that we put women in. And so like one of them was the mother, where we expect her like to take care of things. And I see this a lot. Like a lot of times I'm asked to do extra like administrative work for gigs that like the male colleagues just don't even think about asking me to do. Or there's the kid sister, or like, I think it's pet role is what they call it, where it's like someone who's fun to have around and we like her as long as she doesn't threaten us. There's the seductress role, which is like pretty self-explanatory, and I think the one that like singers get pushed into a lot. And then there's the Iron Maiden, which is like the strong woman and, kind of unapproachable, how we often think about feminists, unfortunately. And I just think that being aware of those and having like actual examples of what tokenization looks like and really questioning behavior. And I have to do this for myself too, with other women, making sure that I'm not putting them into those roles. That has been a really helpful thing for me to understand how I'm thinking and kind of generalize that. And as far as opportunities, I think it would be really great if there was an intentional practice from especially some of the more powerful like male leaders of any community to invite women to play. It doesn't have to be all the time, but just like not make a big deal of it. So like maybe just say like, it doesn't even have to match the numbers, but like 1 in 4 gigs, I'm going to hire a female musician for a little while and just give them chances. And it doesn't have to be forever. And if they don't fit with your band, then don't keep hiring them just because they're female. But sometimes just that gap, getting over like the hurdle of just getting the gig the first time. Because what's so hard about opportunity is a lot of times it's just getting that one thing, because once you get that one thing, other things come from it. And so what happens for a lot of female musicians is they can't get that one thing, and then they don't get the experience that they would on that gig, and then they're not qualified for the next one. So I do think like there is a place for intentional hiring of female musicians just to allow us to get over that hump. But I mean, it really, like, I don't think it should be mentioned if that's happening. Definitely shouldn't be communicated to audiences. I think that's where we really start getting into trouble, when we start, making a big thing of it. I think it's okay to have productive actions, but just we can't make a thing about it, because that makes it icky.
Yeah, I agree to the best that I can without having experienced these things, but
yeah.
That's going to bring us to our Coda question section. So I got 5 short answer questions for you that I ask every guest on here. And the first one is, what's your go-to feel-good album?
I have 2 of them. Number 1 is Hank Mobley's Soul Station. Mm-hmm. It was the first album that I ever fell in love with, probably because it was sent to me by my very first love, a boyfriend who was not a good boyfriend, but he introduced me to Hank Mobley, so I'll always be grateful. And then my second one was introduced to me in my later years of my undergrad, but it's called The Sound of Summer Running. It's from the bassist Mark Johnson, and it has 2 guitarists on it, both Bill Frisell and Pat Metheny. And I don't know, something about that. Every time I start feeling stressed, like, that's what goes on.
I am going to check that out today.
It's a great album.
What's the best advice about happiness you've ever received?
This kind of goes back to that, the life coach school, Brooke Castillo philosophy that I've been kind of studying recently. And basically there's nothing, according to her, that can make you feel any way. You're the one who decides your thoughts, and so you're the one that decides how you feel, and nothing outside of yourself can make you feel better or worse. And it's just about managing yourself and deciding to feel better or worse, and then deciding to use those feelings and harness them to create action that's going to make you feel good. But yeah, really managing our feelings. It puts a lot of power in our hands, which is both overwhelming, but also just really gratifying to know, like, nothing outside of me can make me feel bad.
Amazing. Yeah. Who is the musician in your life that you think embodies a healthy and fulfilled and happy musician?
So through a really strange series of events, I was introduced to John Clayton, and we have a bit of a personal relationship, and he is, without question, the person that I immediately think of. Incredible musician, great composer, obviously on top of all of that technique and knowledge and context, but also just he radiates peace and joy and love and gratitude. And if there is anything I could do in my life, it would be to radiate that kind of just goodness like he does.
Yeah, absolutely. He has that presence for sure. What one piece of advice would you give to young musicians who are just starting their careers?
My number one piece of advice would be to cultivate the skill of forming and asking questions. Spend time working on them, be brave enough to ask them, be willing to ask people like what you can do better. It's the scariest question in the world to ask, but you learn so much. And then also be willing to ask yourself whether or not advice you're getting is good. Just get really good at asking and answering questions.
Yeah, that's great. And finally, what is your purpose as a musician?
So there's this one book that I read, and I believe it was Dolly Parton who was described this way, but it describes someone, probably Dolly Parton, as, quote, a bright, shiny light. And honestly, like if I could be anything, I would want to be a bright, shiny light, somebody who has joy and love and kind of radiates that the way that I talked about John Clayton doing. And music would be the medium for sharing that with other people, but I think it comes from being a good person first. And so that's why a lot of the work I do is on me as a person, in addition to doing me as a musician. I just want to be somebody that brings a little bit of light in dark and scary times.
That's perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I enjoyed having you so much, and I am excited to digest everything you just said and see how I can apply it in my life. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. Thanks for doing this. I think it's something we all need to talk about a little bit more.
That does it for this episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast. This sick track we're listening to is an original of Alicia's, recorded live. This is Dinner Guests. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did and you want to help us spread the message, please do us a favor and subscribe to the show. Talk about us, share us on Instagram at The Happy Musicians, use our hashtag Happy Musicians, go to our website, thehappymusicians.com, and get more info, and tell us who you think we should have on the show and what I should talk to them about. Thanks for your time and your attention, and for dedicating this time to improving yourself. Thanks so much, everyone, and stay happy.